Hello, and welcome to Judy's Creations in Crochet. And surprise, I know you weren't expecting this. I'm a little surprised myself. And I am doing this because I was tagged last week by Linan at Nina's Knots Crochet. And I almost didn't do this because the one thing I'm afraid of is that I'm just going to ramble. I won't do this in an appropriate manner. And I apologize before I even get started if I do that. I'm going to sneeze. That's twice the day you've seen me and I've sneezed. Anyway, I just put this around me. I went next door and got something that I could put around me because I was a little bit chilly. It probably won't be staying on. Now, about this tag, it's been going down. Here we go again. I often get sneezes in threes. Hopefully, that's the end of it. Sorry for that. There has been a tag going around the YouTube streets, people naming their top 10 books and their top 10 movies. And I know when I get started that I'm going to ramble about it all because there is no way that I could just come up with my top 10 and tell you the 10 in some kind of logical order. Because to start with, I couldn't rate them. I couldn't tell you which one I like better than another. So I hope you will bear with me. I will try to answer this the best I can. And just tell you basically what I like. And I guess that will maybe be of some interest. I'm going to start with top 10 movies. And the first thing you have to understand is, although I have a TV, I don't watch it. And I haven't watched it in years. And the last time I did watch it, it would have been for 10 minutes every morning while I was hooping and watching the Weather Network. Prior to that, I may have watched a little bit to watch game shows. I really liked Wheel of Fortune, Family Feud, and Jeopardy. And that was years and years ago. And I just don't watch TV. First of all, I don't think there's a lot of quality on TV these days. And second of all, I really, really prefer to be crocheting. At one time it was cross stitching. I really prefer to be doing those activities or reading. Those are the things I preferred to do over watching TV. And you say, well, watch TV while you do it. It doesn't work for me, unfortunately, and I'll tell you why. In order to see the TV and hear it properly, I need to wear my glasses. I need them for distance and for hearing, and that's another story. But when I come home, I take my glasses off and I set them on a ledge by the door, and I do everything without my glasses. I have very, very good sight for close-up work. And I don't want to be, off and on, off and on, off and on while I'm trying to watch TV. And that's really hard off and on when you're using your hands to crochet. And I just find it a pain. So I don't. And I don't miss it. I don't miss it at all. And as for going to the movie theater, I did go a little bit at one time, but you have to have somebody to go with. I don't go alone. So I'll give you that background to tell you that I don't watch TV. I don't have a movie package like Netflix or whatever. So you'll see that when I tell you things, it's not terribly current. It's older. So now to get started talking movies, there is something else I need to explain to you. For those that have been here a while, you know that I have a background in or maybe you don't, or maybe I didn't say it quite that way, but I have a music background. I've been involved in music my whole life. And during the years that I taught, and even after, I directed musicals. Musicals are a love of mine. If you came along tomorrow and asked me to direct a musical, I would jump at the opportunity. So, having said that, a lot of movies I really like are the old musicals. I haven't really seen any current musicals. I have been to the theater in more recent years and seen a few more recent musicals, but not much. So, things that rate high for me are movies like The Sound of Music. I've actually directed that twice. Maybe West Side Story. That's the first one I ever directed. And another favorite from the musicals, I'm not going to list them all, was The Music Man, and that's one I've also directed, is The Music Man. I love the barbershop harmony in that show. So musicals rank high for me. Like I said, I'm not going to be ranking these 1, 2, 3. I'm just going to tell you the kinds of things that I like to watch when I did watch, which is rare now. When I was growing up, or maybe as a teenager and young adult, I really followed the music of Elvis. And so I watched the old Elvis movies. I used to have copies. I may still have some around. And I watched all the Elvis movies, and there's nothing wonderful about them. It was just being an Elvis fan. And as a young person, I loved all the old, I'm really dating myself now. I loved all the old Shirley Temple movies. I had some of those as well. But anyway, uh, we'll just leave that back there. I would say I could tell you more the actors and actresses that I like that draw me more so than a lot of specific movies. At a time when I was going to the theater or renting movies, I was drawn to movies that had people like Sally Field, Sandra Bullock, Julia Roberts, Tom Hanks, George Clooney. Oh, I forgot Richard Gere here. Dustin Hoffman, Robert Redford, Denzel Washington, and Morgan Freeman, to name a few. There are others, but those are the ones I could think of when I was making my list. So if any of those people were in the movie, then it was a movie that I was drawn to see. So if I'm naming some movies that maybe include some of those, there was a set of 2 movies with Sandra Bullock. I think she played an undercover cop. Anybody remember those? I can't for the life of me remember the names of them, but I remember that Rose and I rented them and watched them. A recent movie that I did go to the theater to see and really enjoyed was 80 for Brady. I don't know how many of you watched it, but you know what? It had Jane Fonda, Sally Field, Rita Moreno, and Lily Tomlin. These are all older. They were all over 80 except Sally Field, who kept saying she was 76. But I thoroughly enjoyed that. It was funny but enjoyable. And there are a few other movies out there like that with some of the older stars together, maybe playing the parents of a couple or something like that, that I really enjoy. I enjoyed some of the Oceans series with George Clooney, Oceans 10, Oceans 11. I think they went up to Oceans 13, if I recall. I enjoyed some of those. An old movie that I enjoyed was Rain Man. That starred Dustin Hoffman and I forget who played with him, but that was a very good movie. One of my favorite movies was Steel Magnolias. Now that had Julia Roberts and Sally Field and, oh, the name escapes me, Shirley MacLaine, and a few others, Olivia Dukakis, I believe. Very good movie, and a movie that I watched twice. If I watch a movie more than once, it means I really, really liked it. I like some of the Christmas movies. I've watched a few of them more than once because they come on every year. Another movie had two versions, and that was The Miracle Worker. Oh, I used to really like Patty Duke as well. I watched and enjoyed thoroughly both versions of The Miracle Worker. Very, very good movie. Very good story. Steel Magnolias. Another, and this is one of my favorites, was The Way We Were. I watched that movie at least 3 times, maybe 4. The Way We Were is one of my favorites. I love the music. I'm not only Robert Redford, but I'm a Barbra Streisand fan. And again, the music, I love that song, The Way We Were. I actually did a movie-themed mood board for Gary based on that. And I owned it at one time. And here's a strange one. I actually owned this movie, and it was called All the President's Men. I don't know how many of you know it. It was a movie about Watergate, and it was Dustin Hoffman and I think it was Robert Redford that played the two journalists that uncovered Watergate. I don't know why I watched it so often. I think I watched it so often because I really didn't understand what was going on, and I kept watching it to understand better, to learn more. I just was really taken with that particular movie. Back in the older days, I really liked some of the disaster movies. I know there's a lot of them out now. When I went to look up a name or two, from what I remember, back in the 70s and 80s, I see there's a lot of disaster movies out there, and I would like to see some of them. But what I remember, the one I could remember the name of was Poseidon. And there was another one called Airplane, and not part of that comedy Airplane. I know there were several airplanes with Leslie Nielsen and other Airplane 2 and 3. Not those. They didn't appeal to me. There was one called Airplane that was a disaster movie. For the life of me, I can't remember who was in it. Titanic would be in that kind of realm. And there was another one that played in the early 90s, and it was about firefighters. A building was on fire, and I really wished I could remember the name of it because I loved the soundtrack from it. It was one of the few that I bought the soundtrack, and I couldn't find it when I researched it, and I couldn't find my CD. One day it'll come to me. And another movie, this will be the last on my list, another movie I really loved. It was a beautiful movie, but it was the soundtrack that was just unbelievable. And that was Dances with Wolves. Again, that one was probably in the early 90s as well. Beautiful soundtrack. I used to play that a lot. So I certainly named, I think, at least 10 or more movies. This doesn't begin to say all of the ones that I really liked. I remember Lannan mentioned The Big Chill, and I do remember watching it, and we had the soundtrack from that, which was wonderful. But I don't remember a lot about the movie. I do remember enjoying it, but if I had to pick from all of these, some top ones, Steel Magnolias left a big impression with me, and I did watch it a couple of times. That might be my top choice, but I really, really like The Way We Were as well. So that's it for movies. Now, I have a lot more to say about books, and just hang on. Now, books. There's no way I could say my top 10 books. I love books, and to be able to prioritize wouldn't happen. And again, I'd be better off prioritizing authors over books. I'm an avid reader, and I have read since about grade 3, when the bookmobile would come to the school and we could sign out books, and I would take out books every week. And I remember back then in grade 3, this one author, there was a series, and I used to sign out all of those books every week. I would sign out lots of books. I come by it naturally. My mother was quite a reader. In fact, I really got onto Harlequin books when I was a teenager because my mother had, I don't know, hundreds of them in the house. But my brother's also a reader, and my husband was a reader. And in fact, people would come into our house and say, "Oh, you must like to read," because everywhere you turned, there were books, shelves of books. In the family room, big, big shelves of books. In our bedroom, shelves of books. And we saved hardcover books. If I bought pocketbooks, I traded them back in, but I really wanted to make a library. You picture those, in the old English movies where they had a library and they had books on shelves up to the ceiling and the fireplace and the big desk, and they had a ladder that rolled down so you could get to the book. I always pictured that was my dream thing to have. And I knew it would never happen, but I certainly saved books for a lot of years. I eventually got out of buying hardcover books, and I sold off a lot of the books we had, and I've only kept a few series that I really, really liked. And I really enjoy series. And I'm going to tell you from the very early days on some of the books I liked. And then I will tell you that I don't read books anymore. Why, you say, don't you read books? Well, reading books would take time away from crocheting. But fortunately for me now, we have a world of audiobooks. So while other people are watching TV and crocheting, I'm listening to an audiobook and crocheting. My two best things at the same time. But a few books from my childhood. One that made a big, big impression on me was Black Beauty. I read that when I was in about the 5th grade. I was homesick for a while, and I read that book. Really enjoyed it. And we had a teacher. It's amazing that we had this teacher. I had her 2 different grades, and she used to read us every day, I think right after lunch for an hour or so. And she read to us The Incredible Journey. I thoroughly loved that. And she read the whole Little House on the Prairie set. And I actually did get the Little House set as an adult and read through it again. And I enjoyed the TV series. I really did like that. Another children's book that I really like, but I didn't get until I was an adult because I didn't know about it until a former student told me about it, and that was Where the Red Fern Grows. Great book. Reminds me of the movie Old Yeller. I love that movie as well, too. So those are children's books. Moving on. Many, many years ago, as an adult, I read Roots. I'm sure a lot of you have heard of it. I still have a copy of Roots. And I have always said I really don't read books twice. I know some people that really love a book read it more than once, but it's like a pattern. There are so many of them out there. I will never get to them all. So I don't have time to go back and read something a second time. And Now, these books were from late 70s, early 80s, the ones I'm going to mention here. And I suppose by now they'd be vague, but I have a very good memory of a book. And so reading a book that I already know the ending or what's going to happen doesn't appeal to me. And I know that over the years I started to keep track because I read so much. But at one time when I was looking for a book in a bookstore, I'd pick up a book and not know if I'd had it. And fortunately, I had more library books than books that I bought. But I'd start reading, and within a page, I'd say, oh, I read this before, and I could tell you the story. So that's why I generally don't read books a second time. But I have a couple here that I would consider reading again. And one is Roots. That is a very involved book, and I thought it was really well done and interesting, and I would consider reading that again someday if they ever come out with it in an audio version. I have another set that I read in the 80s. I believe it didn't get written to the 80s, and it's called The Kent Chronicles. I have the set of 8 books. There's 8 in the set, and it's written by John Jakes, and this is the first book in the set. And after he wrote this set of 8, he went on to write North and South, and I think there was another pair, and they actually did a mini what do they call it, like not a documentary but a mini series on TV, North and South. Same kind of idea. Now this set of 8 starts in the 1770s, around the French Revolution, and it does start in France for only a short little bit because the boy, you can see the title, he I think he gets on a ship somehow and stowaways to England to actually find his birth family. And the birth family had the family name Kent. That's why this is called the Kent Chronicles. Well, you can imagine they weren't very receptive when he arrived, and he was there a few short years, maybe not even that long, and he eventually stowed away on a ship to America. And the rest, I mean, he gets to America fairly early, well, maybe a third of the way through the book, and he arrives in America, and you know the 1770s, we're going into the American Revolution. And this book and the next 7 take us through the history of the U.S. I was going to, I had something marked to mention. The Kent Saga is not only the continuing tale of a family, but the story of our, and he means U.S., our country's beginnings and growth. A story that can't be told too often. So you really get into depth of American history. Now, in our schools, more so than the schools in the U.S., we do learn the American history more than you learn about Canadian history. So I found it very interesting to read first-person accounts. Basically, this person, who I forget his first name, but his last name is Kent, lived during the time of the American Revolution, and it becomes very real. And he goes on through history. We go through the Civil War, Abraham Lincoln, lots of other historical things. And by the end of the 8th book, we're into the 1900s. It says something different in the literature, but I recall them going into World War II. I'm trying to remember if they didn't even go into the 60s. Around the assassination of JFK rings a bell to me, but I can't swear to it. But I found it very, very interesting because it was what really happened. And it was very interesting, especially for those of you that are in the U.S., may be very interesting history for you to read. So that is a set that I have. and again, one day would like to read them again. Now, the rest of what I have to say has more to do with authors. I have two favorite authors. I will read absolutely everything they put out. I have other authors I really like, and I try to get everything they write as well. But the two best authors I know, the first one is Debbie Macomber, and I think a lot of you are probably familiar with her. She's very prolific. She's been writing for a long time. She herself lives in the Pacific Northwest, I think in Seattle. I could be wrong about that. And she's written a number of series, and one of the series is called the Cedar Cove set, and it's set in the Pacific Northwest, and it went for quite a few books. I don't remember how long, and I thoroughly enjoy everything she writes. She's doing a lot of standalone books now, very current. She still writes. I think something comes out every year. At one time, you would get a book a year plus a Christmas book. And I really enjoy her books. She wrote a couple of books. One was called Surely Goodness and Mercy. These were three angels that came back to earth to help us poor humans in making some right choices in our life. And she, I think she did 2 or 3 books with Surely Goodness and Mercy, getting into trouble back here on earth that were enjoyable. But I really enjoy her books. I forgot to mention, at one time I read a lot of Agatha Christie. I had sets of hers that I have since sold. And before I go on to the other author that is my favorite, I want to mention a bunch of other authors. I really like Ellen Hilderbrand, Pamela Kelly, Emily Richards, Cheryl Woods, Danielle Steele. I owned every single one of her books up until some point a while back, and then I got rid of them, and I'm trying to catch up the others because you never know when they're coming out. I know there are some I haven't read. Susan Mallory, Nancy Thayer, and I really like books by Nicholas Sparks, Richard Paul Evans, and Mitch Albom. If you haven't read any by Mitch Albom, he was, I think, a sports writer for the newspaper in Detroit, Michigan. But then he wrote a book called Tuesdays with Morrie, and it was based on truth. He knew, I think it must have been a professor of his named Morrie, and he wrote about that. And then he wrote some others. If you've heard, the first 5 people you meet in heaven is a well-known title, and a few others. He writes great books, but I don't think he's writing anymore now. But I really enjoy Nicholas Sparks. Who can't enjoy him? Now, the other thing that I read a lot, at one time I wrote, I didn't write anything. At one time I read fantasy books. Terry Brooks, Guy Gavroche, who is a Canadian author, and there were some others. I did read them at one time. I certainly read The Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe and that whole series, but I don't read that so much anymore. The other area that I really read a lot in is what's called Christian fiction. And there are a number of authors in the Christian genre that write absolutely wonderful books. And the books are generally, I want to back up in a minute and talk about this, are generally current issues that affect people, and how do they handle them. I'm going to come back to that in a minute. I had this in my hand and I forgot to mention Debbie Macomber. I always have trouble with that name, Macomber. She wrote another set besides Cedar Cove that I absolutely loved, and it was called the Blossom Street set, and it had 9 books in it, and it started with this book, and this is The Shop on Blossom Street. This is about a woman who opened a yarn shop. So ladies, you're going to want to go and get this. She opened a yarn shop on Blossom Street called A Darn Good Yarn. And it came out, I'm pretty sure, during the time, if I can find a year, then I'll know for sure. But I'm pretty sure it came out. Oh, this is a rewrite in 2004. Well, maybe it did come out in 2004. I really related to this because, of course, I had just opened a cross-stitch store. And so I just really enjoyed the premise of this lady having a wool shop. And the story sort of revolves around 4 women that get involved in a knitting class. Knitting, unfortunately, not crochet. But Debbie herself is a knitter and has some knitting books out. But anyway, they get involved in a knitting class, and these are 4 people from various ages and different circumstances in life, and their interaction, their stories, and how they become friends and support each other, and so on. A wonderful book. Relationships amongst people, and some of those people continued on to other books in this set. And then there was one more book in this set called 20 Wishes, and that was a book that started with 4 women getting together, I think of Valentine's Day, but I'm not sure. But these, all 4 women were widowed, and they got together, and in the process of their having supper or whatever together, they came out with the decision that they were all going to make a list of things they wanted to do, things they had always wanted to do and never done. That's why it was called 20 Wishes. Very reminiscent of the movie The Bucket List. Same kind of idea, but again, I related to it because they were widows that had gotten together, and I thought, and I did make a list of 20 wishes of things I wanted to do. I don't know what happened to that list, and I don't know what was on the list anymore. I think maybe I did do a couple things on the list, but that was really enjoyable. But if you get started with the first one, you're probably going to want to read the rest of this series because she is an excellent, excellent writer. Excellent writer. And I'm one for series. I love series. I get involved in them and I feel like I know them. They're my friends. But moving on to my other, like I said, I had 2 favorites, although Danielle Steele was a favorite too. But Debbie and Karen Kingsbury. Karen Kingsbury is a Christian author, Christian fiction author. She writes phenomenal books, very emotional, and things that are very relatable to issues that people have to handle in everyday life and how they do handle them. The first of hers I ever read was A Time to Dance, I believe. But she has one set of 5 called the Redemption series. And the 5 books are Redemption, Remember, Return, Rejoice. And I didn't write down the 5th one because there are 5 and they're based on a family. They're based on a family called I can't believe this. I can't remember the name of the family. And I mean, I felt like I was part of the family for so long. And there are 5 children in the family, and each book is about each child specifically and their issue. You know, one was dealing with divorce. The first one probably was the weakest of the 4, but still very good. One was dealing with being an unwed mother. One was dealing with a child that fell into a pool and was unconscious for quite a while, and they worried about the effects of that on her, and it did have some effects on her. I don't want to go into it all, but an excellent, excellent set of books. And the interesting thing about it is that after these 5, they went on to write more series connected to that family, the family whose name I can't remember, and I wish I could, because I think they did a bit of there's a TV series based on the family whose name I can't remember, and it really makes me mad that I can't. But anyway, they did another series of 4, and then another series of 4, and I think they did 4 more series, but in groups, so the people in it were a little more connected, and one was a family that was friends to this family, and they became they did some standalone books in this set as well, and they became like your family. You wanted to be part of it, and you see as these 5 children grow up and different things happen, and their children grow up and things happen, and talk about issues. An issue where, oh, this one really got me. The story, this was not part of this family, but one of the books I read was about this woman who had a child from previous relationship and was married, and the man was very abusive, and she decided to she had a son, and she decided to get out of this marriage and leave with her son. Now, this man was a very controlling, very mean type, and he wanted to get back at her for leaving, and he decided to sue her for custody, not his child. He wasn't particularly drawn to the child, didn't treat the child well, but as revenge to her, he decided to sue for custody, and he was suing her as being an unfit mother on the basis that, as a Christian, she had fanatical ideas and raising this child in a fanatic way. That was about the time there was a separation of church and state, and so it was very appropriate. And I'm sitting there reading this and thinking, how can you say this? How can you say she's unfit because she has Christian principles? I know that all of you don't believe as I do, but this just floored me that this would be the basis of calling a parent unfit. And I'm sure there are a number of you out there that feel that way. She did a series of 3 books based on 9/11, actually really good. And there was one, that really hit me. I read it twice, called Dandelion Dust, where a couple have adopted a baby at birth. And now at 5 years old, I won't go into the specifics, but at 5 years old, because of some loophole in the adoption, the family the couple, they weren't married, the couple that put him up for adoption were wanting him back. Could you imagine what you would go through, your feelings, if you had this child for 5 years? He's your child. You feel like it's your child, and they want to take him back. And it's not a good situation for that child to be back in. We had a book discussion group on that book. Absolutely phenomenal books this woman writes, and she has a God-given talent. And she says that when she's writing, she doesn't always know what she's going to write. It just comes, she writes, she cries while she's writing it. Some of them are so, so emotional. So I'd really, really recommend Karen Kingsbury, and a few other Christian writers are Deborah Rainey, Robin Lee Hatcher, Denise Hunter, and Melody Carlson. But nobody writes a book like Karen Kingsbury. She's phenomenal. They've made a few movies, I think, on the Hallmark Channel. Dandelion Dust is definitely a movie. And she now and her family are producing their own movies. So you might want to check that out. Absolutely the best, most talented writer I've ever come across. So that's my list. I guess I got long-winded. I warned you I would ramble and be all over, but I hope you found some of that interesting, and maybe I've enticed you to check out a few of the movies, or for sure some of these books. Like I said, I'm an avid reader, and I'm always looking for new authors to follow, because some of the authors I like to really read, I've read everything and there isn't any more. And I also enjoy the books that are very low-key mystery, and they're set in craft stores. There's a whole series of them about knitting or other crafts, and they're they're amateur sleuths in solving the mysteries. So I do enjoy that kind of thing as well. But the minute Karen Kingsbury has a book on the market, I want it. I want to read it, whatever it is. So apparently she has one coming out, I think in September or October, and they're busy making a movie on it already. So she is, I'd highly recommend her and her. So that's it. That's all I have to say. I hope you enjoyed it, and I'll see you on our regular day, Thursday. Have a good week.